You just caught me shoveling coal. Hi, my name is Jack Dawson. I was a fitter on the Titanic. I helped shovel coal into any one of her 162 furnaces. I did this with dozens of other men. We were called firemen or stokers also. That was a part-time job. My other part-time job was being on the bridge helping officers like him. So I had 2 part-time jobs on the Titanic. Today I have a rather sad tale to tell you, a tragic one, really one that concerns arrogance and entitlement and just really bad luck. Actually, I died on the early morning of April 15, 1912 from hypothermia. Today I'd like to share a story with you, so come with me and let's talk all about the Titanic. The design of the Titanic was approved in July of '08. The keel was laid in March of '09, and the hull was made in May of '11 at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. And this was near completed there. It cost $7.5 million and was put together by 3.5 million rivets. It was owned by the White Star Line, which was a British company, but then sold to American financier J.P. Morgan, and is an RMS, or Royal or Registered Mail Steamer. For instance, it had 2 anchors on it, each one weighing 15 tons. One length was 175 pounds. When completed, she was 882 feet long. That's almost 3 football fields long. 92 feet wide. The depth was in the water was 60 feet and was 10 stories tall. Then she was fitted, where she had 4 smokestacks. 3 of them actually worked, and it had a couple miles of carpet laid in it, miles of electrical wiring put in, miles of piping for plumbing for sinks, toilets, faucets, bathtubs. It had over 2,000 beds on it also, and it was decorated. And then the Titanic is launched. And on April 2nd, 1912, the Titanic leaves dock for sea trials, includes tests of speed, turns, and a stop. So she's tested out. And then the week of April 3rd to 10th, Titanic was loaded with supplies, and that's when I was hired here, along with crew members in Southampton. And it was loaded with supplies like 40,000 eggs, 36,000 oranges, 3,000 teacups, 5 grand pianos, and plenty of bunk beds were put in also. And you needed to get a boarding pass to be on. This was Titanic. You notice Mr. Ismay's name. They used to be owners of the White Star Line, and the son took over to be general manager, J. Bruce Ismay. And then there's the first class ticket, second class, or third class. Boarding was Tuesday, April 10th, and I was up here watching on the top of the ship, and the air was electric with people coming in to the Titanic. People were going up the gangplank, taking their luggage up, things were put in the cargo hold. And everybody was excited to be on the ship no matter what class they were in. This was a state-of-the-art steamer. This was a terrific event to be held, and the place to be in Southampton, or actually in South England at this time period. And people were very eager to be on it. This is the Titanic leaving Southampton port, beginning her maiden voyage, with the passengers gathered on the stern or back of the ship. The Titanic leaves Southampton at noon on the 10th, and the Titanic stops in Cherbourg, France, and at 9 o'clock it leaves Cherbourg to go to Queenstown, now known as Cove. So she went from Southampton to Cherbourg, across the channel, and then overnight to Queenstown, known as Cove, and then out to sea. And people were very happy to be on the ship, milling about it, walking on the deck, children playing, people socializing, playing cards. Some people in their room just relaxing, some people going to one of the fine restaurants. And some people were sending out, quite a lot of them, actually Marconi wireless transmissions, like telegrams sent to people telling them how excited they were to be on this place. And they were doing these Marconi wireless ones. So again, the timeline is she leaves Southampton at noon, Cherbourg, France. She arrives in Cherbourg 2 hours later, leaves later on that night from France, and arrives the next day at Cove, Ireland, and leaves Cove, Ireland the next 4 days out to sea. First class ticket was $430 in those days, which is $10,000 in today's money, up to $33,000, which was over $100,000. Second class ticket, $65, which is $2,500 in today's money. And these are the number on the ship: 329, first class 285, second 710, and third class at $35, which was about $1,200 in today's money. Many of these people were Irish immigrants trying to get to America for a better life. She weighed 52,000 tons and sailed at 22 knots. Again, first class, second class, third class, and a crew of about 900. Total of 2,223. Biggest and most expensive room went to Mrs. Charlotte Cadiza. She traveled with her 36-year-old son, a maid, and a valet. This was their sitting room. She had 2 bedrooms, a 50-foot balcony, and she had 14 luggage pieces of trunks of luggage. And that's when you have too much junk in your trunk. Here's how the rooms were decorated. This is in the Edwardian style, which came after the Victorian style, but just before Art Nouveau in the late 19-teens, and Art Deco in the late 1920s. And these were all the things they had put in the ship by the board, like tables and chairs and beds, etc. And a rattan furniture in some places. And a little, this is where I worked. We're going here to the boiler rooms. First class amenities included a swimming pool, a squash court. Also there's a mailroom, a cargo hold, and 870 staterooms, including first class, second class, and third class, obviously below. And it also had a bridge, a crow's nest, officers' quarter, a wireless room. First class amenities include a swimming pool and a sauna, along with an exercise room. And women could use it in the morning, men in the afternoon for first class. It had a speed bag, stationary bicycles, and ironically it had rowing machines. This is a first class promenade, and this is a first class steward by the name of Alfred Nebel. Actually, I knew Alfred's sister, Mary. She was in my Presbyterian church. And you had first class service right to your door. It was like being in a 5-star hotel with plenty of amenities. And all cruise ships have a giant staircase here, a grand staircase. This was the Titanic's, with a dome above it, letting in natural light. And first class amenities also included a smoking room for the men who like to smoke cigars, play cards, and drink hard liquor. And also had a parlor like this for first class, and a parlor like this. And way down at the end of the ship, and I mean really far away, it was really hard to get to because it was so long and complicated to get to, was another place by the name of Fenny. And at Fenny, they had a bar there by the name of City Fire. At City Fire, they had a meat market there where you could go there and pick up a piece of anything. Moving on. So welcome aboard. So I'd like you to come with me and come right up with the stairs with me, because we're going to go right into the Titanic, and I want you to be with me now. So for breakfast, first class had smoked salmon and eggs made to order. Second class breakfast was a bit mediocre, but good enough. First class service included tables like these with specially made china of blue and gold with the White Star emblem on it. First class women dressed like this. First class men like this for dinner. Third class lived in these accommodations, 2 to 10 to a room in bunk beds with 1 sink. There were just a few bathrooms with just 2 bathtubs, so you get what you pay for. Third class would stay in the steerage, which is the front of the boat, where all the wires, chains, and riggings were, and would have these kind of accommodations on top of the boat and eat in these pedestrian-like, cafeteria-like settings. Third class would just have 1 menu. Breakfast, dinner, tea, and a very light supper. Best thing was roast beef. Well, first class had its own menu for dinner, which included a 5-course meal of oysters, foie gras, asparagus vinaigrette, cold poached salmon, boneless beef short rib, and Waldorf pudding, plus any of the fine French pastries and fine wines of your choice. Third class dressed like this, which is drab, pedestrian, and colorless, but functional and practical. And this is me. I'm working in the boiler room. She carried 6,000 tons of coal. We put in, us fitters, 200 tons a day into her. She produced 100 tons of ash that went into the ocean. This would feed 9 giant boilers that would heat up things and go into 2 giant steam engines, each weighing 725 tons, to produce 30,000 horsepower. In other words, to propel this, a triple steam steamer. It had 3 propellers, 23 feet diameter, 23 feet, and 17 at 70 RPMs. She had the latest safety features imaginable, that and her sister ships, the Titanic and the Olympic, which were also steamers that went across the Atlantic. And she had 16 watertight compartments, each separated by a door that would raise and lower from a switch you could flip on the bridge. So her sister ships were designed this way to be safe, and you could flip these switches and the bulkheads would rise up. They would only rise up of only a few feet above sea level though, because they wanted more room for first class cabins, and they didn't want any staircases in the interior of the hull. So this was the safety features. 4 of these compartments could flood it at one time without endangering the ship's buoyancy. So they were like compartments that held water. And there were indicator lights when these doors were activated to go up on the bridge. So she was practically unsinkable, but not truly watertight. She carried 20 lifeboats, 16 rigid, 4 collapsible. This was the correct number of lifeboats for the ship of this tonnage. So 4 forward compartments could flood without the risk of the Titanic sinking. 6 did. On board was Margaret Brown, or known as Unsinkable Molly Brown. She liked to be called Maggie though, but she made her money mining stock in Colorado, and was very opinionated. She represented really new money. She was very opinionated, outspoken, and spoke her mind. Also, Thomas Andrews, the ship architect, he was on board. Also, Benjamin Guggenheim, the copper magnate who traveled with his lover. And this is Sir Cosmo Gordon and his wife, Lady Lucy Duff Gordon, as well as J. Bruce Ismay, who was the son of the original owner. He was managing director. He was on board. Also was John Jacob Astor IV, a merchant, and Arthur Vanderbilt was going to go on board, but he had all his luggage. Him and his wife put all his luggage on board beforehand, but his mom called at the last second and said, "Sonny boy, I got a feeling this is not a good trip, don't go." And he listened to his mom and did not go. J.P. Morgan, the owner, was supposed to go on this, but his wife broke her wrist the night before, didn't go. Milton Hershey paid $300 for his ticket, but didn't go, the chocolate magnate, so he had to take another steamer instead. On the second trip of the Titanic was supposed to go Henry Clay Frick, an associate of Andrew Carnegie, J.C. Penney, and Marconi himself. Also on board were the 8 musicians who stayed in second class and were paid 20 pounds a month. They played under all conditions and were very good at playing. This is the captain. This is Edward Smith. He was 62 years old. His last voyage before he retired, and he personally hired me. And I liked him. He was very amiable, easy to get along with. The crew liked him too. And I looked him up in the library before I went on the trip to find out info about him. Yeah, in the 1890s, one of his ships ran aground, another one caught fire, another one caught fire. He had a problem with a destroyer. It was redacted info. But he also managed the Olympic, the sister ship that was a floating steamer, actually like a floating hotel, like the Titanic, and so he was very apt and up to the job. And this is Captain Smith looking at the bow or the front part of the ship with some of his officers. He had 6 officers, here they are, and Smith would often be behind the wheel or the helm of the bridge. And here I am right here. This is my other job. I was an orderly. Actually, I was like a gopher, and I didn't mind getting the officers tea or any kind of things that they need, running errands, messages. I always wanted to go to New York to be an artist. I fell in love with the Hudson River School of Painting, and I wanted to be a landscape artist. I didn't care how I got to America. And this is Smith with some of his officers, Mr. Pittman, third officer, and Mr. Wilde. Let's take a look at the officers so you know who they are. Henry Wilde, chief officer. First officer, William Murdoch. Second officer, Charles Lightoller. Third officer, Mr. Pittman. Fifth officer, Mr. Lowe. And sixth officer, Mr. Moody. And in the crow's nest was Reginald Lee and Frederick Fleet. And if any problem came up, like they saw an iceberg, they would ring a bell here, here, or here to notify the bridge. And wireless operator was Jack Phillips, and his backup was Harold Bride, who played a mean game of poker. Everything was fine until Saturday, April 14th. And then at 9 o'clock, the Coronel reported ice. At 11 o'clock, Smith canceled the lifeboat drills because of high wind. At 1:42, the Baltic reported ice. At 1:45, the America, the ship Milton Hershey was on, reported ice. And at 7:45, the Baltic reported ice also. And here's the Titanic sailing through an ice field. So, she is 350 miles southeast of Halifax, Nova Scotia. She's traveling at 22 knots. And we're here in the boiler room, and we're shoveling coal, and we're trying to figure out why was Smith going so fast in an ice field for? Well, everybody had a different opinion. My friend Arthur said that, Arthur Priest said that maybe she's traveling real fast because she wanted to break the record the Olympic had going across the Atlantic. Another guy popped up and said, well, maybe the sailing conditions are just right for sailing, and that's why he's going so fast. Another one said, well, maybe they want to get to New York really quick and make a big splash, a big dramatic entry, because everybody wants to get home early from a trip. And I said, well, hey, maybe so. Maybe Smith is going this fast because it's his last voyage. He's on the practically unsinkable ship with state-of-the-art technology. What could possibly go wrong? So, at 7:15 that night, the temperature dropped to 32 degrees, 28 degrees in the water. An iceberg warning is posted on the bridge. At 7:30, the Californian, about 25 to 20 miles away, reported passing large icebergs. At 9 o'clock at night, Fleet and Lee were put up into the crow's nest, and Smith had gone to bed. And the Mesaba, about an hour later, sent ice warnings to the Titanic, but the radio operator, Phillips, ignored it. He had too many Marconi wireless transmissions to send out. And the California then reported actually was surrounded by ice and couldn't move and telegraph the Titanic. But the Phillips, the radio operator, scolded them. I got plenty of work to do, he said. I don't have time for this. Stop bothering me with information. Okay, so he didn't report it either. And at 11 o'clock, the conditions weren't really good for sailing. The water was like a sheet of glass with no moon on it. It was so, no moon showing, and no waves could be hit up against any iceberg, so you couldn't tell where they were. And everybody knows that an iceberg, 10% is above water, but 90% is what lurks beneath. And the ship's binoculars were missing. They were in the crow's nest. Another man was supposed to have them, but they were locked up in his room because he didn't come on the voyage, another crew member. So this was at 11 o'clock, and it received 8 ice warnings by this time. And then, at 11:39 at night, lookout Frederick Fleet picks up a phone that is directly connected to the bridge. 6th Officer Moody, right here, answers the call and is told, iceberg right ahead, and this is the burn. And Murdoch is in charge of the helm. So he does 3 things. The bell is rung, iceberg right ahead, and does 3 things. First of all, he steers to the right to avoid the collision. And he puts the engines in reverse to slow it down. And in addition to that, besides, he shuts the doors on the compartments down below. And he has 37 seconds to react to this iceberg traveling at this speed. Too late. The Titanic hits the edge of the iceberg. And chunks of ice are sent flying and go on the bridge as it nicks part of the iceberg on the edge of it. And this was the iceberg. And right away, 6 compartments are compromised. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as the Titanic runs over part of the underwater iceberg, right here. That is, the hull was compromised. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toward the bow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It could have been slashed by the ice like this, or the rivet heads could have been popped off, scraping against the iceberg, allowing water to come in between the seams. Either way, dozens of gallons of seawater were flowing into the Titanic per minute. Had the officer Murdoch hit the iceberg head on, this wouldn't have happened. But we're all taught to avoid a collision and steer to the right or left of it. And if he would have hit it, he would have been fired on the spot. And because he put the engine in reverse, it actually slowed the speed of the turning of the Titanic, so they didn't know any better. Smith wakes up, goes to the bridge at this time, and immediately demands an inspection report. He finds out that the mailroom is starting to flood with water, and he wants them moved. A tough task because there are 3,300 mail sacks carrying 9 million pieces of mail. At 11:55 at night, stewards knock on the doors of passengers' cabins and issue them life jackets. Everybody gets one, but there are plenty to go around. And at midnight, Thomas Andrews, the ship's architect, surmises that if 5 or more of the ship's forward compartments start flooding with water, the bow would drop down into the water more, causing the water then to overlap into the other compartments like a domino effect, and the ship has 2 or 3 hours to survive. These are the davits that hold up the lifeboats with giant pulleys and long ropes of about 60 to 80 feet to lower it into the water. At 12:05 a.m., Smith starts ordering the lifeboats to be filled. And these are the life jackets they have that have canvas with cork in them. But the only problem is there's only enough room on the lifeboats for 1,170 passengers, not enough for 2,230 passengers, about half. So a CQD call is put out, which is a distress call. They didn't have SOS in those days. And we are sinking fast, passengers being put into boats. Who would get this? The Carpathia, 58 miles away. The Californian would not get this because she turned off her radio at 11:35 at night. And the water then starts coming into the boiler rooms. This causes problems, even excessive fires. And I had scrambled out of there because I wanted to go back on the bridge and see what I could do to help out. On the way up, I ran past the cargo hold and it was filling with water. And at 12:25 in the morning, this was a scene as chaos ensued. And at 12:45 a.m., the first lifeboat gets lowered, but it only has 28 people in it. It could hold 65. The crewmen are afraid the davits won't hold up the weight of all the people involved, and no one really wanted to be dropped 60 feet into the dark ocean. Fireworks are sent up, 8 of them are sent up. The Californian would see this, but thinks the Titanic is having a party, a celebration, and lamely tries to use Morse code signals with a lamp to try to contact it to no avail. At 12:55 p.m., this is the scene as moored lifeboats are being dropped into the water. And at this point, a telegram is sent to the RMS, to the SS Burma from the Titanic. We have struck iceberg, sinking fast, come to our assistance. Here is the latitude and longitude to the Burma. At 1 o'clock, this is the scene as the bow of the Titanic starts going down into the water. And more lifeboats then are sent out, and one of them is Molly Brown. She's on a lifeboat with Helen Candy, as well as who's manning the ship is Quartermaster Hitchens. And the boat is filled, and they start sailing away from the Titanic. And after a while, Molly then confronts Hitchens and said, "We should go back and look for any survivors that may have jumped in the water." Hitchens says no, and they have a bitter disagreement. So much so, she wants to threaten him to throw him overboard. So she takes her oar and goes back to the area and picks up passengers, and she becomes a heroine for doing that. In another boat that could hold at least 50, there's only 12 people in it, which include Cosmo Gordon and his wife, Lady Lucy. They have 10 crew members in it and all their luggage in it. And they pay each crew member a £5 note to say, watch our luggage, which is really not, don't let anybody else on. It's code for that.
Oh no.
Isidore Strauss and his wife Ida refuse to leave each other. They both perish. Here's a plaque. Novella Dean is 3 years old at the time and becomes the last survivor of the Titanic. She dies at age 97 in 2009. Survived. Dorothy Gibson, a silent film actress. Within 30 days of the sinking of the Titanic, she makes a movie called Saved from the Titanic, the silent film. Survived. Elsie Berman, lawyer. She becomes the first woman barrister of in the London area. Survived. Masabini Hosano, Japanese businessman. He misses his wife. He wants to go back. So he gets on a lifeboat somehow, and when he gets back to Japan, he's vilified. He didn't do the honorable Japanese thing and go down with the ship. He becomes a social pariah for the rest of his life. Here's my friend Arthur Priest, who survived other sinkings and even future ones and was nicknamed the Unsinkable Stoker. Survived. Carl Barrett, professional tennis player. Died. Charles Melville Hayes, railroad executive, survived. Helen Candy on the ship with Molly Brown. And this is Rosa Mary Abbott. She was in England and she married a prize fighter. She didn't get along with him, but she had 2 teenage sons. So she decides to emigrate and leave him to America. She goes on the ship, and in the sinking of the ship, her 2 sons drown. She gets on a collapsible, but starts filling with water. She stands in water for over an hour before she's rescued. She has to go, she survives, ends up in a hospital for 2 weeks. And then becomes a Salvation Army worker. She is the inspiration for Kate Winslet's role playing Rose in the 1998 film Titanic, based on a real person, because she's strong and she survives. Oh, and here we go. Jacques Couture dies. He was a science fiction writer. Dies. Henry Harris, a Broadway producer. Lives. Lucy Leslie, Countess of Ross. She's on a lifeboat administers first aid and helps drag people in her boat, a heroine. Survives. Frederick Fleet, the guy who found the iceberg, noticed it first. He lives and commits suicide in '62. Violet Jessup was a stewardess. She survives. The year before that, she worked on the Olympic, but the Olympic ran into another ship and caused a great collision. She survived that. And then later on, in 1916, she was on the Titanic, and the Titanic was blown up by hit a German landmine in the Aegean Sea, and she survives that by almost collisions. And Charles Jogan, who we call the drunk baker, he actually put loaves of bread into his men put loaves of bread, 50 of them, into the Titanic's lifeboats. He wanted to make sure they were well fed. But during all this melee, during the sinking, he goes back to his room 3 times because he wanted to drink liquor. And he goes back 3 times, and when the ship sinks, he's just about last to jump off and survives 90 minutes in the water because his blood alcohol acts as antifreeze. And he's able to tread water. He survives. So the moral of the story is it's okay to be drunk once in a while.
Yeah.
So, pocket watch of John Star March died on 1:27 in the morning. And by this time, the water had come into the corridors. It was a tough slog going anywhere. And the passengers on the 6th level, the Irish passengers had a hard time getting out with the water being this tall, and they had to go up 6 flights of stairs. At this point, the Titanic is at an angle, and all the dishes start falling out of the cupboards, and glasses start to spill. The rooms are askew and all slanted, going down as the bow was going down, and the 5 grand pianos slide to the edge. At this point, this is what Captain Smith sees and knows the Titanic is going to sink. By 1:15 a.m., the water had reached the second staircase, second place. So the sink rate was, after midnight, it was 25%. After 1 o'clock, it was 50%. After 2 o'clock, it was 100%. And the first lifeboat, as I said, lowered at 12:45, with only a few people in it. The last lifeboat sauntered off the edge of it because it was at the same level as the water. And this is the scene if you're in the water, and the scene if you're in a rowboat. At 1:20 a.m., Benjamin Guggenheim says of him and his valet, "We're dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen. They both perish." At 1:40 a.m., John Jacob Astor wants to get on a boat, but can't. Only women and children go on. So his wife Madeline gets on. She's his second wife. She's 18 years old and 5 months pregnant. She gets on a boat and survives. He obviously perishes. She helps pick up passengers. She becomes a heroine. Months later, she has a baby boy and dies in 1942. Thomas Andrews, the architect, dies. And J. Bruce Ismay looks around and sees nobody else wants to go on the last 2 lifeboats. So he just shambles and ambles onto one of them. But the newspapers think differently. Ismay crowds in a lifeboat, leaving women and babies to die. He's warned to get back from the lifeboat, but goes on. He becomes the official villain, coward, and scoundrel of the whole affair, being vilified from here to eternity. At this point, there's chaos, panic, and disorder. I'm right here helping passengers. And I'm thinking, some people want to help out in very disastrous situations. Some people just want to save themselves. What would you do? So next to me, though, was 5th Officer Harold Lowe, who had a gun and fires it into the air to maintain order. This lasts for a few minutes as everybody is in a state of pandemonium. At 2 o'clock a.m., this is the scene as the grand staircase fills with water, and water starts crashing through the glass ceiling. Water starts pouring in, and Smith will be left standing here by the wheel where he's supposed to be. At 2:05, the last lifeboat saunters off, and at 2:10 a.m., a large wave comes over and splashes us into the ocean. Here I am right here.
Sure.
At this point, the stern starts sticking up out of the water. You can see the propellers, people jumping off, people on top here. And this is the scene as people from lifeboats watch. At this point, Smith says, "Every man for himself." Father Biles, a Irish Catholic priest, stays on board to hear last-minute confessions and gives absolutions. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic splits in half. The bow then starts sinking into water, all the riggings fall off, and the bow then keeps going into the water. At this point, the stern starts sticking up straight out of the water and comes to a 90-degree angle, stays that way for 12 seconds, and then shoots down real fast. In the vortex that's created in a whirlpool is Officer Lightroller, who starts swirling around. But an air vent blasts the air out and actually propels him into the air and then shoots him out into the ocean, saving his life. I watch all of this in horror and disbelief. Now the bow and stern start sinking into the water. And yes, there are people still on it. However, the stern implodes on the way down. And they both hit bottom 10 minutes later, traveling at 30 miles per hour, and both land here. The bow in very good shape, the stern in shambles. There's a 15 square mile debris field around the area. They landed on an abysmal muddy plain in the middle of the North Atlantic, 12,600 feet below sea level, or 2.5 miles down. It is pitch black, the temperature is 25, and the pressure is 6,000 psi. Meanwhile, at the top, the Titanic survivors, some on overturned boats. Many of the officers were manning lifeboats, about 700 were left. This is me right here, and I'm thinking right now, I can hear cries of help all around me. I'm thinking my life's over. This is it. There's no walk down the aisle, no wedding smile, no flowers, no, nothing for me at all. I got nothing. My dreams are shattered. And then I realized all these other people's dreams are shattered too. And then after about 15 minutes, the cries of help diminish as people slowly start dying from hypothermia, like 1,000 knives being stuck into you. And then I started feeling my hands started to go numb. I couldn't feel my arms or my legs. A coldness came over me, a darkness came over me. I passed out and I died. 2 hours later, and 2 hours too late, the ship Carpathia would come, and the captain searched for searchlight. With the searchlight, found no survivors, but plenty of bodies encumbered in those life jackets in the ocean. But did find about 20 lifeboats with 700 passengers in them. All are damp, cold, in a state of physical and emotional shock. J. Bruce Ismay is on one of these boats, comes right off the ship and goes into the Carpathia and telegrams the headquarters, the Titanic is lost with a great loss of life. This is the iceberg that sank the Titanic, the scene from the Carpathia. The survival rate is about 60% or so in first class, about that. Second class, about 30%. Third class, about 20%. The loss of life is staggering. In first class, 118 lost, and 4 women lost and 1 child. In second class, it gets worse, 154 lost, women, 12 lost women, no kids. And third class, 392 lost, 90 women lost, and 44 children lost. So the percentage rate was 32% survived, 68% were lost. The majority of the loss came with the crew, about 900 of us, and almost 700, a little less than half, died. So the sink rate was better for first class, worse for second class, terrible for third class, as well as here. The statistics are right here. Number saved, about 710. Number lost, about 1,510-ish. So all these were the sink rates, the survival rates. This made the newspapers, right here, and Titanic, great loss of life, evening news. And 3 days later, on the 18th, the McKay Bennett became transferred. It was a ship that became a mortuary ship and sent out to the area the Titanic was in, 350 miles southeast of Halifax. In it, she had dozens of morticians, a priest, 12 tons of steel to sink any bodies because they were too mangled, and tons of ice to save any. It became from a rescue to a recovery. Dead bodies were removed. Here. 120 of them are laid to rest in a cemetery in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Let's see, remember Mr. Deagle? Well, this is him. He was the pantry key that he had. Next to him is Reginald Fenton, who was a butler. He came to visit relatives in England, and obviously on the way back, things happened. As well as Owen Samuel, he was a second-class salon steward. This is now a tourist site. Crowds gather to find out in Times Square in New York about the sinking. The news is flashed as it happens and written on a large board from the New York American, and everybody's watching. These are all men except for 4 women. You can tell by their hats, 1, 2, 3, and 4, because you're living in a man's world. When the Carpathia docks on April 18th, there are dozens of newspaper reporters there, curious, morbid onlookers, and shouts are immediately shouted out to the people on board. Tell us a story, any story. What have you got for us? We'll pay you $50, $100. Just tell us something, and they do. So these are the headlines that come out of this: a disaster. Titanic was a floating hotel. Hundreds died. Let's see who survived. Julius, Theodore, John, Lois, and Lowell. This family survived. In London and in New York, lists are put up of who survived and who died. Excuse the color photograph. This is Marjorie Coyer and her daughter, Charlotte Coyer and her daughter Marjorie. She lost her husband, she lost her father, Harvey, who died. He was carrying 5,000 pounds with him, which would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. In today's money, they would have had a life of luxury, but all lost to the sea. And at Nova Scotia, in the Halifax area, there is a list with a steel plate here with raised metal letters. Let's see, who's on the list? Well, Mr. Deagle. And here I am, Mr. Joseph Dawson. Yes, I was real, right here. Who also died? Well, this is Catherine and John Bork. She refuses to leave him. She stays on the board with him. And his sister, Miss Mary Bork, refuses to leave this little family unit, and they all perish together. Mr. Wake was a baker on the Titanic. Mr. Matherson dies. He was an all-purpose construction worker, and Mr. Volk was coming from Serbia. And a memorial service was held in Battersea Town Hall, which is in South London after this. Immediately, within a couple of days of the Titanic sinking, the Senate actually comes into action, and they want to have an inquiry in this. And they do from the end of April all the way to the end of May, and so do the British. The Americans are led by Will Smith, shown here, a senator. And the Titanic then is put on trial as to what happened. Who comes to this meeting? Lady Duff Gordon, Mrs. Astor, Madeline, Mr. Lightoller, Mr. Ismay, and dozens of people who were on the ship as passengers. And they all talk about the same thing. There was too much confusion. Nobody knew what was going on, and it was too much pandemonium. The U.S. Senate blames then the Captain Smith for traveling too fast in an ice field. It blames the British for having lax safety rules, and blames the Californian for turning off his radio. The British blamed Smith for traveling too fast, as well as the Californian. Californian was about 20 miles or so away, but there was another ship that was in the area. Decades later, we found the ship logs, the Mount Temple. It was on the other side of the ice field. And the Titanic passengers could see this because it had 4 masts to it, but didn't cross the ice field. It was a cargo ship, and it was just too dangerous for that ship to travel that way. Some follow-ups, light trawler survives on this upside-down rowboat, and then later on he volunteered in World War II and helped evacuate 120 men from Dunkirk. Ismay claims that the conditions were right for sailing, so that's why they sped through it. Now what happened to him? He actually spent years of his life afterwards trying to settle insurance claim for all the people that had problems. So the upshots of this, what happened? In less than a year, then laws were passed that have lifeboat drills on every boat. A 24-hour radio watch, there had to be lifeboat space on every single boat, and international ice patrol in shipping lanes. And the Olympic, the sister ship, got a refit and had her bulkheads redesigned to the bottom to hold more water. They put actually stairs into place, and obviously had more lifeboats. And about the rivets, well, they were examined years later, and it was found out that the rivets had 3 times as much slag as they do now, which means they're inferior. So this, you can see the stress points right here in the red. That means the rivet has, along with the cold water, could have popped off when it scraped the iceberg, and it popped off the fasteners from their holes and allowed the water to rush in between the separated plates. Maybe. September 1st, 85, Robert Ballard, Dr. Ballard was the first one to find the Titanic. Here he is in his ship, the Alvin, investigating it. And here he is again. And the Alvin has a camera to it, and these are the pictures it took of where Smith would stand, where I used to work. And the interior, which is slowly rusting away with rusticles and algae forming on it. And she is slowly rusting away at the bottom of the Atlantic. And interesting sights like a bathtub, a chair, a chandelier, a propeller, engine mechanism. So you say, what happened to the bodies? Well, they were distributed over a 50-mile area, and they eventually got waterlogged and sank. And so you might see things like this along with debris. Plates. Money may have had silk in it, which is why it survived. A 3D scan was done 2 years ago, last spring. It showed the stern just in a pancake heap of shambles here. Propeller. This is the stern or back part of the ship. Here's where the grand staircase would have been with the dome over it. And this is what it used to look like. This is what it now looks like. A very eerie scene, a bottle of champagne from the ship. Titanic bow was driven 60 feet into mud and is forever frozen in time. Titanic is a $15 billion industry, and you can buy everything you want with it, including carpets, mugs, a clock, a pretend newspaper, a bottle, a candle, and even coal from the bottom of it, real coal. But as we know, when we take from a gravesite, that's called grave robbing. That's not cool to do. And you can go on auction and get Titanic plates, silverware. You can trivialize it and make it into a game. Here is John J.J. Astor's toy model and a pillow from the Titanic. And people collect this kind of memorabilia in their homes. There are hundreds of collectors of this. You get Titanic tea, a doll, and a stein. And 17 films have been made of the Titanic, including A Night to Remember in the 50s, which is a book made into a movie with a shipboard romance. And James Cameron's Titanic, made in '98, grossed $2 billion. And with that, you had crying parties led by prepubescent adult girls. Last year, the Titan submersible went down for adventure tourism, and they gloated that this submersible was made of composite carbon. And they thought they were holier than thou. And that they solved the problem of technology, being super cool about it, but it imploded on the way down. 5 more lives are added to this. Coast Guard spending millions trying to find it. James Cameron, the director of the Titanic, has gone down the Titanic in his submersible many times and holds the world's record for going down the deepest in the Mariana Trench at 7 miles down around the Philippine area underwater. There are dozens of 150 books written about the Titanic. There are dozens of books written for kids for the Titanic, but we all know that children don't understand what it's like to drown or to die from hypothermia. There is a club out here called Writers for Kids, and send them a message saying stop hitting up on kids for ideas, pick on someone their old age, and in addition, enjoy the wonderful life out here instead of making money. There are plenty of websites on this. Each website has has a page in them about anybody who survived the Titanic, anybody who lost from the ship, any company at all. There are at least 6,000 pages about it. Anything connected with the Titanic at all. On another level, on a personal level, these clothes are 30 years old, and I got them in a rummage sale to make a statement. Where I used to work here and give lectures like this and get paid for by people who take classes. They had a survey question at the end of it, and it said, how was the presenter dressed? Well, not too good. Maybe we could do something better instead of having shallow, inept, incompetent bureaucrats telling us what to do. Moving on. There are 7 Titanic museums, one in Orlando, one in Branson, Missouri, with a fake iceberg and just really a museum behind the facade of it. One in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, one in Halifax, Nova Scotia, one in Belfast, Ireland. And you can see things like that. There, you can see the rivets on there. Maybe. May have popped off. And the sinking of the Titanic ended the Edwardian era. But at this exact time, coincidentally, this was the start of our modern way of thinking. That is, a new point of view, a new morality and concepts. And these are the men and women behind us. At this time, Albert Einstein developed his theories about the universe that changed our ideas about it. Sigmund Freud, just before this, had done interpretation of dreams about our internal way we think about things. Frank Lloyd Wright was making houses that you still live in today based on his idea of the ranch house. Teddy Roosevelt was passing laws for environmental work as well as protecting consumers. Orville and Wilbur Wright were flying around after 1906, changed the way we transportation. At this time period, Marie Curie was discovering uranium and was the first footsteps into the nuclear age. Maria Montessori became a new way of educating young kids. 1913, Henry Ford developed the production line, and everything we have is made on a production line. And at this time period, Picasso was making his abstract art. And women were finally getting organized to get the right to vote and to move on. All these men and women are what we call the modern way of thinking. This was a new point of view. In conclusion, the sinking of the Titanic was based on entitlement and arrogance, thinking that we are He-Man and masters of the universe, or She-Woman and masters of the universe. And we're not. We have to work with nature instead of trying to conquer her all the time. And we see this, and with lectures here by wonderful people here that are very intelligent about how we're not responsible for this and how we can get away with it based on entitlement. We see here that this with administrators out here who rape the land down south. So, in other words, we need to work with Mother Nature, get along with her. That's how we can do a better job. And thank you. That is the end of this.